Chapter 13. Know Thy Enemy. Master Capel's office was always cold and clean. Hermione stood stiffly on the rug that was too thin to muffle the stone's chill, her eyes flicking, unable to stay still between Capel's expressionless face, the metal orb that perpetually reshaped itself above his desk, and a new thing in the room, a small iron cage sitting atop a perfectly folded square of black cloth. Inside it, a rat squeaked shrilly, scrabbling at the bars. At this moment, Hermione felt quite like that rat. Only minutes after she had listened in on Mistress Varric and Master Capel's argument, the latter had appeared at her dormitory door. He had not asked her to follow, he had ordered. And now Capel folded his hands behind his back. He did not pace, he never paced. He simply stood wire-thin and with that unreadable expression he loved to wear. "You know why you're here," he said, almost boredly. Hermione swallowed, wringing her hands before shaking her head rapidly. No, sir, I don't. I swear, I can't think of a single reason. It's Christmas, after all, and classes aren't even in session. Did I do something incorrectly when I was shearing the Yule log? I wasn't sure whether to use a vertical slice or a diagonal one. Maybe I disrupted the pattern. "Oh, Icknoy," Capel held up a hand, tilting his head in an oddly bird-like way as he peered at her. He let the silence stretch. Finally, he said, "This animal," he gestured lazily toward the cage, "is a student, or was. He ventured outside the fortress alone." His lip twitched, not quite a smile. "Foolish. Unfortunately, I had to perform my professorial duties and hamper natural selection. But at least I may also dole out punishments for such indiscretions, and the other professors are so uncreative. Lashings are painful, but lack the humiliation of being turned into a common creature." "Wouldn't you agree, Miss Morgenstern?" Hermione gasped sharply just as Capel flicked his wand, a thin violet bolt striking into the cage. The rat shrieked and scurried to the side. That's awful," she burst out, eyes blazing in outrage before sense returned to her. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean." She pushed her palms against her bright pink nightgown and took a frantic breath. "It's just from a theoretical perspective, sir. There's normally continuity in transfiguration, but how much? I mean, I've read about animagi, and of course it's different, completely different. But still any injuries they receive in animal form translate to their human form, and that should apply to general human-to-animal transfiguration. So I was wondering, well, whether you plucked a whisker, for example, would that remove a corresponding what would it remove? One's first thought would be a bit of their mustache, or fuzz, or such. But whiskers aren't a vestigial trait like human facial hair is, and their jobs performed mainly by the human nervous system. So would removing a whisker cause brain damage instead? And do memories cross over? Will he remember the animal fear of being caged, if not the exact events? Oh, well, of course he would, since Obey's principles assert. Suddenly, a faint, rare smile, the type usually reserved for Conrad, appeared on Capel's face. "You are clever," Hermione pinkened, "especially," he continued, "for the switching spell you placed on Mistress Varric's cloak pin." At once, the color faded from Hermione's cheeks. Capel's small smile widened slightly. "Switching the vibrational resonance to make it act as a two-way channel for eavesdropping ingenious, Miss Morgenstern. Crude, of course. Far less elegant than advanced communication charms. But it is the limits that bind those the most that push them too. I had taken you for a parrot, but it seems you do possess some brains after all." Unfortunately, her heart hammered in delight and dread both. On one hand, she was finally being praised by Master Capel. On the other, it was because she had broken about a dozen school rules. I didn't," she blurted too fast. "I mean, I sent the cloak pin, yes, but the switching spell, someone else must have added that. Probably a troublemaking older student. Someone very clever, much cleverer than me, no doubt." Capel's eyes narrowed, although his thin lips twitched upwards. "Ah. Of course, and I suppose she's also quite humble." "She?" asked Hermione nervously. "Why'd you say she, specifically? In fact, he'd say it's more likely a boy, if anything. Mistress Varric is rather young, of course, only in her 30s, yes. Naturally, that makes her quite the target for unwanted attention from the older boys. It's sick, though, that this culprit would hijack an innocent present from a girl who simply admired her professor for his own twisted desires. Her eyes shone with insincere righteousness. Why isn't the headmaster on this? God, I expect. I expect a full investigation, for Mistress Varick's sake. Shesh is such a pure-hearted soul, imparting her knowledge of the dark arts onto all willing students, and this is how she's treated in return. It's so horrible, she dabbed at her eyes, but Capel looked unmoved. The only question I have for you, he said, Iswy, why Miss Morgenstern? I didn't, you did. Curiosity is not a sin, Miss Morgenstern. Foolishness, however, his gaze flicked toward the cage. The rat was panting now, trembling violently. So tell me, girl, was it out of fear, paranoia, or simply a silly desire to know what others say about you? A sudden thickness filled Hermione's throat, and she could not answer even if she wished. She just stared at the floor, fighting welling tears. I see, whispered Capel. It was fear, wasn't it? You believe Dusher is your enemy? I don't know, Hermione snapped, glaring up at Capel through tears. All I do know is that it wasn't Mistress Varick threatening to run to the headmaster, was it? And so you admit to it, Capel said coolly. He stepped back, folding his arms behind himself once more. I will not punish you. I have no desire to turn you into a squirrel or a swallow or whatever else would suit you. But stick your nose where it does not belong again, and you will wish I had chosen lashings. Now leave, please. No, you'll answer me. You'll tell Muhi in a flash. Hermione's jaw was held in Capel's hand. Do not anger me, girl, he snarled. You think yourself above punishment. You are not. You are not above anything. You are a fool to come here, and even more of a fool to stay. Abruptly, he released her. She stumbled back, almost losing her footing on the thin rug as her palm flew to her jaw. A hot prickle of humiliation crawled beneath her skin, but she forced her breathing to steady. Capel watched her with that same measured disinterest, as if she were a book he'd already read well. Good, he murmured. Now you at least know who to fear. Dusher is not your enemy, girl. I cannot say the same for myself. Hermione's pulse roared in her ears. The rat let out a thin, exhausted sound behind her. She dared not look at it. But Capel turned away from her entirely, flicking 2 fingers toward the door. That will be all. In a flash, she was gone. She nearly tripped over the threshold in her haste, and the heavy door swung shut behind her with a loud sound. Hermione ran and ran, until she burst into her room and slammed the door hard enough that the frame rattled. Her hands fumbled over the lock twice before it finally clicked. Only then did she slide down the door, breath shuddering as tears streaked hot down her cheeks. The humiliation, the fear, the sound of the rat squealing, the student squealing the knowledge that Capulk knew her face crumpled, and she pressed both palms against her eyes. She could not believe her own arrogance, her idiocy. But then Hermione froze, her eyes falling upon something near her bed. It was parchment, but it did not look like the same scrap that had been gifted to her earlier. It had grown much longer, and was no longer blank ink shimmering on the page, lines curling and intersecting like spiderweb strands, forming sigils, symbols, and precise notational marks. Hermione stared, throat tight, then slowly pushed herself upright. No, she whispered. But her feet carried her forward anyway. She crouched and picked up the parchment with trembling fingers. The ink was faintly warm, as though freshly written. Hermione's eyes scanned over the notes, looking at the steps, the correspondence tables, a scroll of a rat's neck split instructions to a ritual. At once, Hermione looked to the bottom, to the neat handwriting she already knew would be there. Merry Christmas, hope you enjoy the gift. Hermione had not enjoyed her gift. In fact, she had kept the parchment firmly at the bottom of her trunk and resolved to not open it until, well, she was not quite sure when, just that she did not want to do it now. For once, Hermione understood how others felt about homework, all of which she had been happily completing during the break. For the rest of the holidays, she and Astrid mostly frequented the library or the dormitories together. Astrid had been wanting more variety and dragged Hermione to go with the Mistress Petrova, the Beast's professor, along with a few of the others staying at Durmstrang to visit the flying reindeer. It was still the dark days, so it was quite difficult to see the reindeer through the fog of permanent night, but it was thankfully made easier by one of them having a glowing red nose. Still, when the rest of the school returned a few days before term, both Astrid and Hermione felt very glad to not have to rely on each other anymore for companionship. Astrid practically bowled over Emil with her hug. The shorter boy had a rather goofy smile on for a few moments before Astrid spotted Sophia and rushed to her instead. "Did you have a good break?" asked Hermione. "I certainly did." Before Emil could answer, an older blonde boy came behind him, towering over them both. "Oh, he certainly did not," Alexander said, grinning and ruffling Emil's hair. "We went hunting, and he couldn't kill a single fowl." Emil flushed. "I couldn't get a proper aim on any." "You totally could," said Alexander, laughing and already walking away. "You're just a softy, it's okay. Next Yule, you and the womenfolk can stay in the kitchen to make a meal out of what we bring back." "Yeah." Emil's flush deepened. "Ignore him," said Hermione firmly. "There's nothing wrong with not wanting to kill. I myself would never have the stomach for it. Honestly, perhaps you should stick to the kitchen. It's a really important skill, learning how to cook." For some reason, Emil somehow got even redder. "Thanks for the vote of confidence. But it's fascinating that you were hunting," Hermione went on. "Were you using magic? I'd have thought that magic outside of school was banned in your country as well. It seems like something that threatened the statute of secrecy, the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery was passed into law by the British Ministry of Magic in 1875, which was far after the statute went into effect. I suppose if Britain went so long without it, it mustn't have been that important to upholding the statute. You're not allowed to use magic outside of school." Emil's eyes were practically bulging out. "Wow, how are you expected to practice the spells? Reading, of course. Proper understanding of the theory is loads more useful than practicing besides them." Astrid squealed loudly. "Liv, you're here." Hermione and Emil both glanced at the two blonde girls' fierce hug. "I am," said Liv, smiling as she adjusted her scarf. "My Christmas was just amazing. Went to Mount Olympus. The resort there is simply divine, enchanted pools. Saturn masseuses the works. How about you? Heard you had to stay behind this winter. Again," she pouted, patting Astrid on the shoulder. "Better luck next year." Astrid sighed dramatically. "Yeah, had to stay behind. My mother had yet another conference she had to attend. Price of being the child of someone super successful. Sometimes I wish me parents were nobodies like yours." "Parent," corrected Liv, her smile widening. "You have no dad, don't you remember?" "Oh wow, I totally forgot." "Thanks for reminding me, Liv. By the Norns, you're blessed. Great memory, and if the rumors about your mum are true, two potential dads. Share the wealth, won't you?" Both laughed loudly, but Sophia quickly redirected the conversation to her own Christmas stories. Hermione looked at Emil, her overly long front teeth worrying at her bottom lip. "That didn't seem very friendly, did it?" "Goodness, you're observant," said Emil, smiling smugly as if he'd been waiting to say that for ages. The teachers, over their seasonal cheer, seemed to be determined to drown the student body in a deluge of homework. In each class, the term opened to new concepts introduced, and an accompanying ridiculous number of inches required to write on them. And Hermione, to absolutely no one's surprise, loved it. Even in Transfiguration, where Hermione now did not raise her hand or even directly look at Master Capel, she was greatly enthused by the 5 feet of parchment of vertebral transformations he had assigned. Charms with Mistress Merle was particularly delightful. The grey-haired witch drifted about the front of the classroom like an absent-minded cloud, jumping from topic to topic, while the entire class, even Conrad, stared at her as if she were speaking Mermish. Hermione, however, found every ramble enthralling, jotting down eager notes. Emil leaned over to whisper a complaint, and Hermione shushed him so sharply he'd sat ramrod straight for the rest of the lesson. At the end of class, Mistress Merle blinked at the clock, clapped her hands, and said, "Yes, yes, very good, off you go." The students nearly stampeded for the door, but Hermione hesitated only a moment before clearing her throat. "Mistress Merle, you haven't given us our homework." Emil made a strangled sound beside her, and the other students stopped in their tracks, staring at her as if she'd grown a second head. Mistress Merle perked up. "Oh, quite right, Miss Morgenstern, quite right." How forgetful of me. She rummaged through a stack of parchment. 3 feet on Hauschen diagrams and how they relate to the spell model of the gouging spell. "Do next class." A collective groan filled the classroom. Emil's face twisted in an expression that was somewhere between betrayal and despair. "Hermione," he whispered as they left the room, "how could you? To me, they would have been unprepared for the exam otherwise," said Hermione, clutching her books to her chest. "It's an important topic. I'm helping you in the long run, helping everyone for their greater good without even asking," Emil muttered. "Wonder who else did that? Conquering Muggles and encouraging people to do their homework is hardly comparable." "Yeah, one's a bit worse, just don't think we agree on which one, that's all." Had barely stepped into the corridor before a jinx slammed into Hermione's shoulder. She was lifted off her feet for one heart-stopping second before being thrown onto the cold stone floor with a painful thud, books skidding across the hall. A few other students snickered before quickly pretending they hadn't. Hermione sucked in a breath, more shocked than hurt. But that was nothing compared to the bruising she collected in the dueling hall these days. Hermione had taken to attending the Crimson Circle regularly, eager to improve, even if the others weren't exactly eager to duel her. Hermione did not blame them. Most were 4th, 5th, or even 6th years. A 3rd year hardly posed a challenge. Still, Lars would usually wave her over once he and the others had worn themselves out. "Come on, Morgenstern," he'd sigh, rolling his shoulders and raising his wand. "I'm tired enough that this'll actually feel like exercise." It was not the most flattering invitation, but Hermione took what she could get. Some practice was better than none, even if it meant being used as a punching, magically flinging bag. Although it was rather irritating to hear Astrid's shrill cries cheering Lars on as he did so. And yet dueling class was still a trial every sparring session. Just as Hermione had gotten the hang of performing the counter to the disarming charm before it could reach her, Master Rommel opened them to all spells, excluding those intended for permanent damage. Unfortunately, Conrad was still fixated on her. "Hello, Miss Morgenstern," he said. Hermione held back a sigh. "May I ask you to be my partner?" "You may, Mr. von Eisenwald," she said tiredly, drawing her wand. "You know, we duel so much that I'd say we needn't be too formal." "You can call me Hermione," Conrad blinked, tilting his head. "Hermin," he said, testing out the name. "Interesting name. You may call me Conrad if you wish. Now shall you send a spell, Hermione clarified just before a stunner shot from her wand. Conrad waved his wrist almost lazily, dissolving her spell. "Fascinating," he said. "Such a complicated pronunciation. Expel." Hermione already dove to the side, rolling across the floor as his disarming charm scorched past her cheek. Her braids slapped against her shoulders as she sprang up, breath hot, wand raised. Glacius! The floor beneath him frosted over at once, but he did not slip, lightly stepping off. "You are faster," he admitted. "That is good." Hermione's eyes narrowed, and she cast the full body-bind curse at him, a jolt of white light flying his way, but he swatted it aside with a negligent sweep. "You should lead with something less predictable," Conrad advised. "Your 3rd spell is always your simplest." "You have a rhythm." "I darneth have a rhythm. You do," he said simply. "Evert Startum." Hermione yelped as her feet left the floor. She crashed onto her back, and stars burst behind her eyes. It felt as if she had been clubbed on the back of the head. Still, she rapidly rolled before he could follow it with a stunning spell, aiming a hex at his boots. He hopped over it. Hopped. Who hopped during dueling? But before she could recover, her wand flew out of her hand and into his. That is four for me this week, he said mildly, offering the wand back with maddening politeness. Would you like another round, Hermione? It's her. She snatched the wand from his fingers. Myone, he inclined his head. Well, whatever it is hard to pronounce. Hermione, cheeks flushed with exertion and irritation, very much wanted to hex him before announcing it, but knew that he was right. Many other students said her name wrong too for the same reason. The next session, he beat her again, and the next, and the next. Once, after she nearly managed to catch him with a nasty hex that forced him to dive behind a desk, he emerged brushing dust from his shirt and said, "Excellent. I almost thought I was going to lose." Hermione dearly wished she had been a second faster. Not so she could win, but so he could be in momentary pain. Instead, she asked if they could take a break and went off near the back. She rummaged through her satchel until she found her water skin. She was gulping water down when an awful sound rose above the crackle of spells. Emil's cry. She whirled around before she saw Emil on his knees, breath knocked from him, while Peter Rehen, stocky, box-faced, and always smirking, stood over him with his wand pointed down. Emil's wand lay on the floor between them. "That's pathetic, Novak," said Rehen, snorting. He sent another spell, making Emil cry out once more. "You're supposed, Tarblak, not catch the spell with your ribs." Hermione's vision went red. Rehen flicked his wand again far too fast, far too gleefully, and Emil flinched, hands raised, knowing he couldn't get up in time. Moors, Hermione didn't think. She stormed across the classroom, slapped Rehen's wand aside with her forearm, and planted herself in front of Emil like a wall. "That's enough," she snapped. Rehen glowered at her. "We're dueling, Morgenstern. He needed to toughen up. He needed you to follow the rules," she shot back. Master Rommel said disarming is grounds for a defeat. "Oh, he let go of his wand?" asked Rehen, acting shocked as he looked down. A smile was on his face still. "I didn't notice. But to be technical, I didn't hit him with a disarming charm. If I had, that wand would be in my other hand. Unless you think someone should automatically lose after a mere fumble. So anyway, why don't you step aside and let us continue this duel?" Hermione's nostrils flared. "If you fire one more spell at him, I swear to God, you'll what?" drawled a familiar voice. Conrad stepped in beside Rehen, expression cool. It was not mocking. Conrad never mocked, but disapproving, as if Hermione were the one being unreasonable. Rehen was following the exercise, Conrad said calmly. "No, he wasn't," Hermione snapped. "He was being cruel. And Mistress Varric has us use dark spells on transfigured mice, not humans, for a reason." Conrad's gaze flicked to Emil, still coughing on the floor, then back to her. "Pain is part of training. It is not kind, but it is necessary. Rehen did nothing wrong. It is wrong when it hurts someone who can't defend himself," Hermione shouted. "He's your friend, so you just look the other way." "Is that it?" Conrad's jaw tightened, the first sign of offense she had ever seen on his face. "You know nothing of my friendships nor my reasoning," he said quietly. "You overstep, and you clearly don't know anything about decency." For a moment, the air between them crackled more than any spell. Conrad stepped forward, narrowing his eyes down at her. "Rehen and Novak are both students of this school. They train to be strong, and interfering as you did only weakens him. You do not help your friend by shielding him." "I help my friend by stopping a bully," Hermione snapped back. Rehen scoffed. "Oh, please, Novak just sucks at dueling. No need to be his attack dog, half-blood." Hermione rounded on him. "If you ever do something like this again, I will wipe the floor with you so thoroughly, it will gleam." Rehen sputtered, but she ignored him and stared Conrad down. A whistle shrilled through the hall. "All right, runts," Rommel barked. "Get out, onto your next class." And so they did, although as Hermione and Emil left, the boy's arm around her shoulders as she helped him walk, she sent them a parting glare. "It's terrible," whispered Hermione furiously, "what they think they can get away with. I mean, haven't they a bit of sympathy? Who thinks—" "You shouldn't have stepped in," said Emil tersely. "Emil, you Aralimpingand leaning on me." "Of course I had to step in. Well, now it's like you were my knight in shining armor or something, like I'm weak." Hermione was about to respond that Emil wasn't exactly strong, but decided against it. Fine, she huffed instead. If you don't want my help, I won't give it. As long as homework's the exception, Hermione. Hermione, you know that I'm not talking about homework, right? Right, Hermione. My God, Astrid whispered one evening, staring at the table Hermione had claimed in the library. There was barely an inch of wood left visible. Are you building a fort? It is not a fort, Hermione said primly, though she had begun arranging the stacks into a rampart of sorts. I simply need all of them. All, Astrid squeaked. Hermione, that volume on spinal correspondences of Eurasian waterbirds is older than my grandmother. Exactly. Foundational principles never go out of date. Astrid blinked at her, sighed, and wordlessly handed over her charm's homework for Hermione to check. Emil trudged in behind her, wrapped in two cloaks and an expression of terminal suffering. I used to have hobbies, he muttered as he dropped into the chair across from Hermione. Used to have free time. Used to have a life. Now I have scrolls. Save me, Astrid, before I decide to save myself. The view from the clock tower is looking great nowadays. Just have to go out a little window and everything'll be over, she giggled. Seriously? No, admitted Emil. I'm not ready to die just yet. I still have a foolish thing called hope. Maybe May. That way, I don't have to worry about exam prep. Studying builds character, Hermione said, flipping through his assignment. Anyway, you completely got the idea on the soft spiral as it pertains to the shaping charm wrong. The descending arc is meant as an acknowledgement of the object's natural state. The tightening spiral is when one's supposed to impose the new state upon it, and the final flick seals the new configuration. Remember, recognize, reveal, resolve. Or haven't you been paying attention at all? And that's not even talking about your work on the calming draft S in natural magic. Emil let his head fall against the table with a hollow thump. Only a few weeks into the new term, she was spending more time in the library than in her dormitory. Her quills wore down, ink vanished at alarming speed, and scrolls stuffed her satchel until she had to store them elsewhere. It was all of her subjects she was determined to succeed in, but she now threw herself into transfiguration with more determination than any other. She devoured books on morphic thresholds, continuity matrices, cross-species strain, and the ever-argued limits of essential form. Gradualism and the shifting soul, bestial limits, transfiguration at the edge, half a dozen obscure journals that smelled of mildew and glue. The list went on, albeit most of the rest were reference books. Every afternoon, she paced between stacks, muttering to herself, ignoring the 2 6th years that were somehow always snogging behind metamorphic ethics, volume Roman 6. She scribbled down half-answers and contradictions, read footnotes until her eyes swam, made her own tables of correspondences, traced wand movements in the air until her shoulder ached, and always, she returned to vertebrate theory. Part of this new interest was sheer spite toward Conrad. He was still asking her to be his partner in every dueling class, but they had developed a mutual dislike for the other. He did not show it, but Hermione could see it in the way his lips twitched whenever she fell to the floor. But part of it was also fear of displeasing Capel. And part was a simple frustration. She wasn't at the top of that class yet. So when, at last, Master Capel announced their first practical lesson of term, Hermione felt her pulse race with a familiar, half-forgotten thrill. Today, Capel said, pacing before the desks for once, wand tapping against his palm, we progress to simple vertebrates. Each of you has a silver coin upon your desk. Turn it into a salamander. Except for Morgenstern and von Eisenwald, Hermione stiffened. You too will attempt something marginally less pathetic. Conrad glanced at her. She fixed her gaze on the floor, jaw tight. Capel flicked his wand. Two glass tanks popped into being beside him, before sliding across the stone floor and halted neatly before their respective desks. Both were filled with clear water rippling gently under the witchlight. You will not be transforming the container, said Capel boredly. You will transform the water. I expect a result before class ends. Across from her, Conrad rolled his wrist, loosening his wand arm as if preparing for a dueling match. In an instant, she glanced away. Wand raised, Hermione inhaled, conjuring each step she knew so well. She pictured the anatomy of the fish she wanted. An angelfish, delicate and shimmering, with long fins like drifting ribbons. The wand movements were exacting, circular and swooping at the start, but transforming into a rather complex series of wiggles and flicks. Minutes passed as the rest of the class hissed, grunted, or groaned as their salamanders sputtered into malformed blobs. Emil looked about ready to cry. There had been no change to his coin at all. But Hermione, for once, did not help or focus upon any other work besides her own. She carved the final arc in the air, and with a soft splash, an angelfish swished through the tank, its long fins trailing like silver cloth. Hermione allowed herself a small, proud breath before glancing at Conrad. He was still working, his brow drawn faintly inward. When he looked back at her, he did not look impressed or curious, but simply irritated. It was glorious. Hermione smiled at him, just a touch smug. Conrad's jaw tightened, and he returned to his tank with renewed precision. A few minutes later, his own fish materialized, fatter than hers, slow and snowy white. It was a beautiful specimen, but he did not look at it. He looked at her. Hermione lifted her chin and began a series of experiments purely because she could. Splitting the water into multiple focal points and generating more than one fish at once, adjusting pigmentation, giving new transfigured fish particular personalities. One timid, another bold, the last so curious that it began exploring every inch of its tank immediately. Master Capel drifted past once, glanced down, and said nothing at all. That was, she thought, the closest thing to praise she would ever get from him now. When the end-of-class chime rang, Hermione began to gather her things, but Capel's voice cut cleanly across the room. Miss Morgenstern. Stay, her stomach dropped, but she obeyed, watching the class filter out. Conrad gave her one last look, and Emil hesitated at the door, gaze flicking between Hermione and Capel before finally leaving. Capel closed the door with a soft click and spoke without turning. You will accept the Christmas gift, he said softly. I will not tell you again. Whatever you imagine, whatever comfort you think you can find by avoiding it, you are mistaken. You will accept it. You will complete it. If you do not, I will not see that as defiance. I will see it as stupidity. Hermione's breath caught. She trembled as she wrung her hands, feeling as if a bucket of cold water had been dumped upon her. Understand this, Capel went on. Skill will not save you from consequences. Brains will not save you. Nothing will except obedience at the proper moments. His voice lowered. Do not make me teach this to you the painful way. She nodded jerkily, desperate. Good, go. She left the room with steps too quick to be calm. Her breath shortened as she walked the corridor. By the stairwell, she broke into a trot, and by the fourth landing, she was nearly running. Her heart did not stop pounding until she reached the safety of her dormitory, sank onto her bed, and pressed her palms hard to her face. Puck jumped onto the bed, curling at her side. But after only a few moments, with still shaking hands, she pulled her trunk forward and lifted the false bottom she transfigured herself. The parchment lay curled inside, waiting, and Hermione reached in, drawing it out into the light. Then she began to read. On an evening when the library was quiet and the witchlights burned low, Hermione wound her scarf tight around her neck, pulled her satchel close, and hunted. If she was going to perform the ritual, she would at least understand it properly. It took hours of sifting through indexes and following cross-references until, finally, she found its name, the severing and the seal. She checked that no one was watching, then slipped the cracked volume into her arms and vanished deeper into the stacks. The text was cramped and the ink faded, but the meaning cut clear. The ritual was old, a discipline practiced by battle mages who believed strength could only be shaped by carving away the self. It was kicked off by a dark charm, memoriam salve, voluntatem nuda. A spell not to forget, but to peel a particular memory of weakness or defeat loose. to let the mind replay it without mercy for 7 nights. On the final night, the caster was meant to slay a beast, although, from the parchment that had been given to her, she knew that the beast could be a lowly rat, and the torment would end. Their resolve hardened. It wasn't until mere minutes before curfew that Hermione stopped reading on the theory and creation of the ritual. She slid the book under her cloak and left the stacks as silently as she had come. By morning, she had tucked the book beneath her mattress, hidden between 2 transfiguration texts she had already been studying. And then she was racing downstairs, just in time for Master Thalberg to lead his students to the east greenhouse through the fog of darkness. He cast a powerful wand-lighting charm, but Hermione still had to squint as she followed him. When they finally made it, conjured flames flared to life. Hermione and Astrid went to their usual table, Emil and Ivan Petrov going to the one before them. Conrad already stood at the front table, posture ramrod straight. Rows of glass retorts shimmered with thin trails of steam, and Master Thalberg stood before the 7 flames, his thick, soot-dusted hands clasped behind his back. "Today," he announced, "we speak of perhaps the most important topic in transmutation, not in the narrow sense of metal to gold, as the vulgar think, but of the deep process that underpins all transformation. The 7 stages of alchemy." Astrid, standing beside Hermione, leaned in with a whisper. "Oh, I adore these lectures. They make such lovely metaphors, don't they? It's practically poetry." Hermione gave her a tight smile, trying to be friendly and stern at once. "Yes, poetry. But you know, Astrid, you really should actually be paying some attention. Class is not exactly the time for idle chatter." "Who decides if chatter is idle?" Astrid asked, pouting. "Professors," said Hermione. "Of course," Astrid replied with a cheerful nod. "But you aren't Thalberg's emissary, you know. If he has a problem, he can tell me." Before Hermione could reply, Thalberg rapped his wand sharply against the first retort. "Calcination," he said. Inside, a dark lump hissed and burst into sparks. "The purging of dross. Fire reduces all to essence. Most of all, the impurity that is ignorance. The alchemist is forced to realize what is truly important." The class watched as the black matter turned to ash. Thalberg moved to the second retort. A clear fluid bubbled inside. "Dissolution," he said. "After destruction comes surrender. The ashes are dissolved. What resists change must first be unmade." Astrid raised her hand. "So it's like emotional cleansing, letting go." Thalberg gave her an almost impressed look. "In a sense," he said slowly. "It is an intriguing mind that can see alchemy as so sentimental." Hermione, meanwhile, scribbled furiously in her notes, "Dissolution as depolarization. The matrix of identity breaks down into fundamental properties." Note for future reading: could this correlate with substance theory mutable states with ever-remaining essence? When she looked up again, Conrad was speaking. He stood straight-backed, calm, his voice carrying easily. "So each stage is both literal and metaphoric," he said. "Physical purification reflects inner order. True mastery requires both." "Precisely," said Thalberg, visibly pleased. "The noble houses once trained their heirs to think in such parallels." "You understand, von Eisenwald." Astrid shot Conrad a quick, admiring glance, which Hermione caught with mild irritation. Astrid wasn't nearly as appreciative when Hermione said something clever. The next stage separation involved Thalberg splitting the dissolved mixture with a flick of his wand. 2 streams of vapor twisted apart, one pale gold, the other green. "Discernment," Thalberg said. "The careful split between what must be kept and what must be discarded. Precision matters more than anything. Without discernment, you only stir chaos." Hermione leaned closer, her eyes following the motion of the spell. "Conjunction," said Thalberg, stepping to the 4th retort, where the 2 streams merged again in a whirl of light. "Union, the reconciliation of opposites. Fire meets water. Earth meets air. It is the marriage of the elements and of the magician with his craft." "Or her craft," Hermione corrected primly. Thalberg smirked faintly, shaking his head. "Or her craft, yes, Miss Morgenstern." "Would you care to explain what this stage symbolizes?" Hermione hesitated, then said slowly, "It represents synthesis, doesn't it? The creation of something new from what was previously divided. But I think it's also the moment of recognition. The alchemists seeing themselves as part of the transformation, not apart from it." Master Thalberg regarded her for a moment. "Well said," he said at last. "And rarely understood." The professor demonstrated fermentation next a faintly glowing powder that began to pulse with color, threads of violet light weaving through it. Decay gives birth to new life. After death, rebirth. This is when the spirit enters. Hermione raised her hand. "So it's a bit like the form in Transfiguration?" she asked eagerly. "A reaction occurs only when resonance aligns." Of course, transmutation doesn't just manipulate the potentiality of a substance, it manipulates the substance itself, on a metaphysical level. But there's a mirroring of processes going on, no? "Exactly," said Thalberg, nodding. "It is the harmonic point, the intersection of will and substance." Then distillation. Steam rose from the retort, spiraling in fine tendrils that condensed again into crystal droplets. "Refinement," said Thalberg, "the repeated process of purification." Thought itself clarified through trial. Hermione scribbled another note, her mind racing faster now. The final stage was coagulation. Within the last retort, a golden sphere solidified slowly, bright as dawn. "Union made manifest," said Thalberg. "The great work complete, matter spiritualized." The alchemist transformed. Hermione froze in place. Her gaze could seemingly not tear away from the golden light. Her heart pounded before she raised her hand. "Master Thalberg," she said in awe, "if alchemy reflects the union of will and matter, then would it be fair to say that'll magic is alchemical, that the 7 stages are simplified universal grammar of transformation?" Thalberg stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Perhaps," he said, "although I would assert there is no such thing as universal." And so, it was with a pep in her step she returned to the fortress. Classes passed in a blur, and Hermione was all too disappointed when they were over. Not only due to how much she enjoyed them, but also how it commenced even more studying of the severing and seal ritual. She spent the next few days drilling the theory of the ritual until her eyes watered, and the ink on her fingers stained deep as bruises. The book's illustrations were unhelpfully vivid in how much could go wrong: skins splitting wrong, minds going slack as boiled parchment, a wand exploding mid-incantation. She tried not to look at those pages, but her gaze kept dragging back to them anyway. By the last night of the weekend, she had no excuse left. She was ready for the first step, or ready enough. Iva was fast asleep by the time Hermione placed the single black taper on the windowsill. Her name was carved into the wax in careful strokes, and her hand trembled only once as she lit it. The flame rose, a thin, hungry red gold. Slowly, Hermione drew her wand, turned it toward her own temple, and whispered, "Memoriam salve, voluntatem nuda." The flame shuddered, and with a hiss through her teeth, Hermione reached out and pinched the flame between thumb and forefinger. Heat bit into her skin, sharp enough to make her knees lark, but she forced herself to hold it until the light died entirely. It was a vital point of the ritual to sacrifice comfort for resolve. 2 small blisters rose almost immediately, and Hermione cradled her hand to her chest, trying to keep her breath steady. Slowly, Hermione went back to bed, shivering as she slid beneath the blankets. Her burned fingers throbbed, but she could do naught but curl them into her palm to quiet the sting. Puck leapt onto the bed with a soft thump and settled against her ribs. His warmth was a comfort she desperately needed. For a few moments, she let herself lean into it. Finally, she stroked his fur one last time, tucked her wand under her pillow, and shut her eyes. Exhaustion pulled her down quickly, the dormitory giving way to pure blackness. There was no thoughts, no worries. Her mind was blissfully blank. But then the smell came. It was faint at first, damp and sour. Yet it grew more and more potent until the stench was suffocating, burning Hermione's nostrils and throat. She gagged as she stirred, trying to sit up. She did not move. Her eyes snapped open. She was not in her bed. She was crouched on a cracked tile floor, the air thick with mildew and slivers of broken porcelain glittered near her knees. Across from her was a long row of sinks, water pooling across the corners. No, 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 no. Hermione tried to stand, to run, to scream, to do anything, but her body kept its small, terrified crouch. She was locked into the shape she had been in a year ago, cowering in the bathroom stall. The roar came then, filling the room, a deep, guttural bellow that made the tiles tremble and the mirrors vibrate. Hermione's heart seized. Her chest collapsed inward as if her ribs had turned to wire. She knew exactly what came next. Please, she wanted to whisper, though in the memory her younger self made no sound. The club crashed down, and she woke up with a start. Chapter 14. Right and Wrong. The dreams no longer ended neatly with Hermione waking up gasping. Sometimes she woke crying, cheeks wet and burning with shame she couldn't quite place. Sometimes she woke with a strangled sound stuck in her throat, wand already in hand and half raised. Once Iva had shaken her awake because Hermione had been sobbing in her sleep, curled tight with Puck in her arms as if bracing for a blow. She never managed to change anything. There was no clever thought, no spell remembered just in time. She was always trapped in that awful stillness, her body reenacting the worst kind of helplessness, while her mind screamed uselessly. Today, she woke up wrecked, as always. Hermione dragged herself through classes with dark shadows under her eyes, fingers twitchy, attention split between the lecture, and whatever imagined threat her nerves had decided to invent. Sudden noises made her flinch. A book dropped in the corridor sent her pulse skittering. And when she left Transfiguration, only for a first year to crash into her, Hermione yelped and nearly hexed him before she realized what she was doing. But the library, at least, was a place where Hermione could forget it all, where she could pretend that she didn't now dread her own dormitory. If she kept her mind full, there was less room for the bathroom, for the club, for the smell. Hermione, said Astrid, snapping her fingers. Hello, are you even awake? I mean, God, are you done with my charms homework or what? Do you think I keep you around for your lovely personality? Quicken it up, Hermione blinked, eyes stinging, and dragged her focus back to the parchment in front of her. The letters swam. She rubbed at her temple with the heel of her hand, then pushed Astrid's charms essay across the table. There, she said hoarsely. I fixed the spell diagram explanations, corrected your section on Chang's law, and rewrote some parts. Mostly, you kept making references to parts in the texts that seemingly don't exist. Astrid snatched the parchment, scanning it. Wow, she said. Look at all that red ink. You know, when you mark things like this, it really feels like you care. Hermione huffed weakly and turned back to the heavy volume propped open beside her, wood-grain memory and the avian bias. The words blurred together. She reread the same paragraph for the third time and still couldn't tell you what it said. Astrid, meanwhile, had not paused for breath. So anyway, she said, dropping her voice conspiratorially. Apparently Liv thinks Ingrid is definitely sneaking around with that fifth year from South Tower I was telling you about earlier. No, not the handsome one. The one who permanently looks like he's just been informed he exists, like 5 seconds ago, but I told her. I said, Liv, my girl, my one and only, you can't accuse others of being slags when you put on beauty charms so strong that Dumbledore himself couldn't overpower them. Boggles the mind, truly. Like, take a joke, you uptight bint. Hermione managed a weak nod. She turned the page of her book, then turned it back, realizing she hadn't absorbed a single word. Astrid leaned back in her chair, kicking her feet lightly against the table leg. Honestly, though, talking about South Tower Boislers invited me to his dormitory yesterday, you know. I've never been more insulted in my life. I mean, seriously, who does he think he is? And I don't think it was a come-on, I hope so, at least, but to even think that I would agree to be with a boy alone in his room. He basically just called me a worthless slag who should up and die already. A week ago, you told me he was madly in love with you, said Hermione, sighing. And that's what makes this cut even deeper. Well, I've been alone with Emil in his room before. Was he calling me a worthless slag then? Do you want me to answer honestly or—" Before Hermione could respond, a familiar, hesitant voice cut in. Hi, you two." Emil stood at the end of the table, clutching his book to his chest. He looked between them, then his eyes settled on Hermione, and his brow furrowed almost at once. Astrid, on the other hand, brightened like a lamp. She chirped. "Oh, thank God you're here. I came here to spend time with you, but I guess you were too busy spending time with Ivan Petrov, huh? Sort of sad just as I'm fine with Hermione, you spring a new best friend on me." "I was just flying with him, Astrid," he said, rolling his eyes. His cheeks still turned faintly pink, and Hermione could tell he was trying hard not to preen. "And I've been rooming with Petrov since first year. It's sort of insane we're not closer, if anything." "Oh, so girls can't fly?" asked Astrid. "You didn't think to invite me or Hermione. I've invited you to multiple girls-only sleepovers, Emil. And maybe I could get it if it were just me, because, well, all boys on broom staring at me instead of a Hetty can see how that could go wrong. But Hermione wouldn't have that problem, and yet you still didn't bring her. That is so sexist, Emil. Stilly guess that's your choice. You can do whatever you want. I'm not mad. You know, Hermione and I had a great time with each other. Didn't we, Hermione?" She turned to Hermione with an expectant look. Hermione blinked rapidly before nodding. "Oh, yes, we had a wonderful time, just amazing." Emil smiled faintly at Astrid, but his gaze kept flicking back to Hermione. Are you all right? You look like you're about to doze off." "I'm fine," Hermione said, a little too fast. She bent over her book again as if that settled it. "We're studying," Astrid explained, scooting her chair over to make room for Emil. "Well, I'm studying Hermione's handwriting, and Hermione is pretending to read about transfiguring birds. Did you know," she added, lowering her voice dramatically, "that she's been staring at the same page for 5 minutes?" Hermione shot her a warning look. "Astrid." "What? I'm being helpful." Emil sat, setting his book down slowly. "You look tired," he said to Hermione, gentler now. "More than usual," Hermione swallowed. "It's nothing." Still, he watched Hermione with quiet concern as she forced her eyes back toward grain memory and the avian bias, blinking hard and hoping desperately so that if she just kept reading, kept listening to voices filling the space, nothing else would creep in. By the morning of the final night, Hermione felt less like a person and more like the idea of one. She was held together by habit and stubbornness alone, small and skittish. Every sound scraped against her nerves, and every shadow tugged her attention elsewhere. She flinched when someone laughed too loudly behind her, or when a chair scraped the stone, or when Master Iliv let out a jovial laugh. And yet beneath it all there was a bright, almost giddy thread of relief. The nightmares were almost over. Only one more night left. That knowledge carried her through breakfast, through transfiguration, through the long, echoing corridors where her footsteps felt too loud. And it carried her, finally, into dark arts. Mistress Varric stood at the front of the classroom, immaculate as ever, creamy robes unwrinkled. She had her typical stiffly upright posture, and polite smile already painted on. The chalkboard behind her was blank save for a single, carefully written phrase. "Ossifragus, today," Varric said pleasantly, "we will be discussing what I like to call the backbone of many budding duelists' spell repertoires." A few students straightened at once. "The bone-breaking hex," she continued. "A focused curse that fractures bone at the point of impact, cleanly if performed correctly, messily if not." Varric turned, tapping the board once with her wand. A neat diagram appeared of the spell's structure. Then she faced them again, dark eyes sweeping the room. "Now, tell me, why would one ever need such a spell when there are far more efficient methods of incapacitation? Why use something so cruel?" Almost despite herself, Hermione's hand rose. "Yes, Miss Morgenstern." Hermione sat straighter, fingers curling in the sleeve of her robe. "Well, isn't the answer obvious, Professor? It shouldn't be used. Against humans, I mean. There are no circumstances in which deliberately shattering someone's bones is necessary. It causes excessive pain and even potential psychological harm. Its value is entirely theoretical. Many students rolled their eyes, familiar with Hermione's opinions. Rehan whispered something in Conrad's ear. Both of them snickered. Varric regarded her with a small, unreadable smile. Entirely theoretical, she repeated. That is certainly an interesting stance. Hermione flushed but held her ground. If your goal is to neutralize a threat, there are cleaner options, less barbaric ones. The body-bind curse, for example, or the stunning spell which we learned earlier this year. Using the bone-breaking hex shows needless cruelty. Perhaps the only scenario I could even think of it being singularly useful in is if a healer needed to, say, re-break a bone for it to heal properly. The only use you can see for it is to heal, asked Varric. Truly, before she could respond, another hand went up. It was Conrad. Yes, Mr. von Eisenwald. With all due respect, he said politely, that view is so soft-hearted, it comes off as almost satirical. Hermione's nostrils flared, and she had to bite her tongue to not snap at him immediately. He turned slightly, addressing the room as much as Varric. A stunning spell is temporary, and practically every wizard can cast the reviving spell. A body-bind curse was only feared when its counter had not been invented yet, but the bone-breaking hex creates lasting consequences. I can guarantee that nobody in this room, barring Mistress Varric herself, knows even a single simple healing charm, much less how to fix a broken bone, and that is precisely the point. A low murmur rippled through the classroom. Emil was looking at Conrad thoughtfully, nodding along. In a serious engagement, Conrad went on, folding his hands on the desk. You are not dueling in a vacuum. You are fighting someone who may have allies. Allies how will intervene. A stunning spell, the body-bind curseth these last until someone with basic competency flicks their wand. Neither of them survives third-party interference. The bone-breaking hex requires someone with knowledge of healing to intervene, and if such a person is around to help, forces them to spend precious time helping their fallen foe that they could have used to subdue you. And even in a casual duel there are still benefits to the bone-breaking hex. It announces how seriously you're taking the fight and what you're willing to do to win. Pain should never be the goal, but it should always be an available tool. Varric inclined her head slightly. An efficient assessment, she said, already turning her gaze back to Hermione. Do you wish to respond, Miss Morgenstern? That's monstrous, Hermione burst out. Lasting consequences don't make a spellbitter, they make it irresponsible. Dueling shouldn't be about terrifying your opponent into submission, it's about ending the conflict with the least harm possible. And tell me, Miss Morgenstern, said Varric softly, what happens when your opponent does not share your principles? For a moment, Hermione hesitated. Before she could continue, Varric went on. Your position is not without merit, she said, and a few heads turned in surprise. The desire to minimize harm is admirable, necessary even, but it is not sufficient on its own. Conviction without adaptability is a weakness. Hermione looked down at her parchment, jaw clenched. She said nothing. Satisfied, Varric returned to the front of the room. Now, she said briskly, open your texts to page 112. We will spend the remainder of the lesson examining the spell's structure, limitations, and since some of you are already salivating its counters. The hour ground on as they took notes on the spell's theory. Hermione did so sluggishly, her earlier fire banked down to her now usual embers. Emil leaned over at one point, murmuring, It's a relief, you know, under cover of Varric's back being turned. At least now I know I'm not in that much danger if I skip a library meetup. Hermione managed a thin smile. Don't speak too soon. A haughty sniff came from Emil. I speak only the truth. Oh, now it makes sense why you're so quiet, whispered Hermione, huffing a slight laugh. You're lucky I'm so nice, otherwise I'd have a great comeback. By the time Varric dismissed them, Hermione felt wrung out. Students filed past, the din of conversation quickly rising. Emil slung his bag over his shoulder. You coming? He asked. In a minute, Hermione said. I need to ask her something. Emil studied her face, then nodded. I'll see you later, then. Save me a seat at dinner, will you? Oh, that's a tough ask, considering how everyone's always jockeying to be near me. With a snort, Emil left. The room was now emptied, and Varric stood at her desk, reorganizing papers with precise, economical movements. Yes, Miss Morgenstern, she said without looking up. You wish to speak? Hermione bit her lip before slowly approaching the front. Oh well, Professor, she glanced at the cloak pin Varric still wore. You're still wearing my gift, are you? It was quite a silly question, and from Varric's bemused expression when her head rose, she knew it too. Yes, she said slowly. I am. It was a pretty present. Did you stay behind just to ask me that? No, I will, Mistress Varric. I've been wondering about something to do with Master Capel. At that, Varric's eyebrows, thin and groomed, rose. Master Capel, she asked, smiling softly. What do you wonder about him that he himself cannot answer? Do you happen to know him well? Asked Hermione after a moment. You've worked here for a few years, haven't you? Then, she added lamely, I want to get on his good side, that's all. Transfiguration's one of the only classes I'm not top of, and I don't think he likes me very much. But I like him very much, of course. Especially his style of teaching, very individualized, isn't it? Varric's fingers paused in their neat stacking of parchment. Individualized how? Well, Hermione said, he seems to believe that pressure produces better results than encouragement. Varric regarded Hermione longer, then with a flick of her wand, conjured a high-backed wooden chair opposite her desk. Sit, she said mildly. You look as though you might fall otherwise. Hermione obeyed, perching stiffly on the edge of the chair. Up close, she could smell Varric's perfume, now something faint and oddly woodsy. It reminded her of her father's 3-in-1 shampoo, body wash, and conditioner that Mum often bemoaned. So, Varric said lightly, sitting as well, Master Capel troubles you. I wouldn't say troubles, Hermione said quickly. He's difficult to read. That is true, Varric agreed. Though I would argue that implies there is something worth reading in the first place. Despite herself, Hermione frowned. You don't think there is, Professor? Ulrich is a brilliant theoretician and an unremarkable teacher. Varric's lips curved faintly. He is deputy headmaster not because he excels at guiding students, but because he has friends in the right place. That sounds rather unkind, Hermione said, uncertain partially because she could not imagine Master Capel having any friends at all. It is simply accurate. He does not care enough to be cruel. That is his defining trait, Miss Morgenstern. For a moment, Hermione was flummoxed. How? How could Master Capel not care if he had gone all this way just to torture her? And Varric must have known that Hermione surmised her the reason why there had not been any follow-up letters until Christmas. After all, why else would Capel have been threatening Varric to not interfere in student affairs anymore? And so, Hermione tried another angle. Has he ever well taken someone on, so to speak, as a sort of project? Perhaps if the students showed aptitude. Varric gave a soft, amused huff. No, he is not sentimental, Miss Morgenstern, nor is he ambitious. He has no proteges, no rivals, no great pedagogical vision. He teaches because it is required of him, even with the talent aptitude invites expectation. Expectation invites effort, and effort, she said smoothly, is something Master Capel avoids whenever possible. Hermione stared at the edge of Varric's desk. The woodgrain swam slightly. Then, she said quietly, what would make him take notice? Varric went silent. She steepled her fingers and stared intently at Hermione. When she spoke again, her tone was unchanged, pleasant, and conversational. I do not know. I can think of all the possibilities I wish, but not one would fit Ulrich. Perhaps if the child was his, she laughed airily. Although, even then, I doubt that would interest the man after its first few gurgles. Why did he ask you? Asked Hermione with an unbidden thought. To visit my home, that is. He's in charge of everything admissions-related, isn't he? And Yowell, you're not required to do anything over the summer, are you? You're not in an administrative role. I haven't the foggiest why I were the one informing them. As I said Varric, smiling, Ulrich is one to foist his duties onto others. But I suppose, It also has something to do with the fact he knows nothing of muggles. He'd have come in fur-lined robes, and likely would have just bewitched them to agree to whatever he says. A sudden surge of confidence, fiery in its intensity, filled Hermione, so much so that it overpowered even her fear. But isn't that exactly what you did, Professor? Bewitch my adoptive mother into agreeing. Varric did not stiffen. She did not bristle or grow cold or even look particularly surprised. She only regarded Hermione with the same polite interest she had when Hermione had suggested the bone-breaking hex's main utility lay in healing. Yes, she said pleasantly. I did. The words landed with a dull finality. Hermione was unsure whether or not to gape. You just admit it. I see no reason not to. It was the most efficient solution available at the time, no. Well, I mean to do that, it's just wrong, said Hermione loudly, wringing her hands now. That's muggle baiting, you know, and that's been illegal in wizarding Britain since. Miss Granger, Varric interrupted gently, tell me something. Had your mother been left entirely to her own devices, no magic, no pressure, no intervention of any kind, would you be sitting in this castle now? At Hermione's sudden silence, she went on. I did not like having to do it, but it was necessary. No different from your lease-off Durmstrang being a muggle boarding school-off, you being a half-blood. Hermione's breath caught. She was not surprised, not really. She had always known that Varric knew. She had seen that final look Varric had sent her before leaving her home. But hearing Varric say it so plainly still sent a sharp spike of panic straight through her chest. I don't, that's not. Hermione swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking now, no matter how she clenched them. That's not why I stayed. I didn't come here to argue about ethics. I apologize for bringing that up. I came because Yauno. Varric's fingers stilled where they rested on the desk, but Hermione pressed on nonetheless. You know about the letters, about the threats, about what Master Capel has been doing, and I know you interfered. He told you to stay out of my affairs, didn't he? He was furious. I heard him, she broke off, breath hitching. Why? Hermione demanded, tears blurring her vision now. Why did you stop him? Why did you help me if that's what it was, and then just walk away? Like a door gently but firmly shut, Varric's expression closed off as she leaned back slightly in her chair. Her long hair was threatening to slip from its bun. Hermione, she said quietly, please don't stop. He's awful. He's cruel and he enjoys it, he does, and I can't, her voice cracked. I can't do this alone. If you can stop him, if you already did once, then do it again. Just finish it. For a long moment, Varric said nothing. Then she turned, gesturing toward the door with a precise flick of her wand. It swung open at once. Go off now, Miss Morgenstern, said Varric. Remember, 3 feet on the bone-breaking hex's structure. Hermione didn't move. Varric's eyes hardened. That was not a suggestion. Humiliated, shaking, Hermione rose and stormed off and into the corridor beyond. The long sleeves of her crimson robes darkened as she rubbed at her eyes, but she walked on still. Hermione did not go to dinner. She told herself she even followed the flow of students partway down the corridor, but somewhere between the stairwell and the first bracket of shimmering witchlight, her legs simply stalled. The noise felt too loud, the light too sharp, every footstep echoing too much. She turned without quite deciding to and made her way back toward the North Tower instead, moving quickly, head down, wand already in her hand, though she could not remember drawing it. Her room was dark when she slipped inside. She locked the door with shaking fingers, then leaned back against it, breathing hard, as though she had run a great distance. Hermione undressed mechanically, folding her clothes with the same careful precision she always used, even now, even when her hands trembled. Then quickly, she donned an old-fashioned white nightgown, climbed into bed and lay on her back, staring up at the rough stone ceiling. Sleep did not come gently. It never did anymore. When it came like a blow. The troll was there again, always there. Too large for the space, its bulk filling the room until there was nowhere left to move. The stink of it clogged her nose, thick and rotten. She tried to scream, to raise her wand, to do anything at all, but her body would not obey. Her feet were rooted to the floor. Her arms hung uselessly at her sides. The club descended in slow, horrible certainty, and she always knew that it was going to hurt, that it was going to be her fault, that this time it would not stop. Hermione woke with a strangled gasp, bolt upright, heart pounding so violently it made her dizzy. Her nightgown clung damply to her skin. For a moment she did not know where she was, only that her throat ached and her hands were clenched into fists so tight her nails bit into her palms. Puck lay across her thighs, heavy and warm, one paw resting on her stomach as if to anchor her there. His yellow eyes were open, watching, before he leapt off of her and onto the floor. It took longer than usual for the dream to loosen its grip. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her feet met cold stone, which helped, but only slightly. She sat there for a long moment, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way she had taught herself to do. Hermione could hear Iva's soft breathing on the other bed and could see the other girl fast asleep. Still, after Hermione stood, she crossed the room slowly, with light footsteps, fearing she would wake up Iva otherwise. "Somnus," she muttered, waving her wand in Iva's direction just to make sure. From her trunk she withdrew the materials, and with a few whispered words, the candle, the threads, the knife, and the basin all were gently carried to their proper places. Then, hating herself, Hermione opened the door and creeped out. It was dark, any lights around now snuffed out. She raised her wand and whispered, "A Kiorat." The summoning charm was perhaps the spell taught latest in the year, but Hermione had learned it long ago, and so a rat, fat and grey and squealing, was flying through the air just a second later. It struck her palm with a frantic weight, claws scrabbling. Hermione closed her fingers around its middle before it could twist free, her grip firm but careful. Its heart fluttered against her skin, impossibly fast, and her own heart twisted with guilt. Puck trotted forth, his eyes still unblinking as he looked at the rat hungrily. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling as she slipped back inside. Conviction without adaptability is a weakness, Varric had said. Hermione swallowed, walked back to her bedside, grabbed the knife, and did what had to be done. She did not linger over it. One quick motion, clean and efficient, the way the ritual demanded. The blood flowed bright and shocking against the silver basin, clouding the water as she poured it in from her water skin. She washed her hands briefly, though the red seemed to cling no matter what she did. The candle burned low, its flame warped and guttering, the letters carved backward into the wax, casting strange shadows on the walls. Hermione positioned the mirror and sat before it, cross-legged on the floor. The glass reflected her face, pale and hollow-eyed, with the surrounding hair escaping its braid in wild curls. She stared. At first, she saw only herself. Then the edges softened. The lines of her face wavered, as if viewed through water. Her reflection swam, blurred, and behind her something darker began to take shape. Her breath caught. She whispered, "Ti divido me invenio." The words felt heavy on her tongue. As she spoke them, she imagined it herself, her frozen, useless self, rising up behind the glass. She did not turn to look. She did not need to. She felt it there, close and terrible and familiar. Her right hand dipped into the basin, into freezing cold water. The shock was only dulled by the lingering warmth of the blood. When her hand withdrew with trembling fingers, she drew a line down the mirror, a red streak cutting her reflection in two. Her heart hammered, but she did not stop. She took the black thread next, holding it over the flame. The fire licked at it hungrily. For a moment it held, then snapped, curling into ash. Hermione flinched as if something inside her had broken too. She picked up the white thread and wound it carefully around her wand hand, tying it snug. "Caniungo quad restat," she whispered. Finally, she reached for the candle and pinched the flame out with wet fingers. It hissed softly, a sound like a breath being released. The room fell silent. Hermione sat there for a long time after, staring at the mirror until her reflection settled back into something solid and singular. When she finally stood, her legs were weak. She felt awful. Unbidden, a sob tore free of her. But for the first time in weeks, when she lay back down, Puck jumping atop her once more, the dark did not feel like it was waiting to swallow her whole. She slept, and peacefully so. The dark days were declared over on a clear, brittle morning, where the sun crept over the mountains in a slow spill of gold, catching on the high towers of the castle and setting the frost on the parapets ablaze. Enchanted banners unfurled themselves along the bridges and balconies and battlements. Deep reds shot through with threads of silver light, and bells rang from the towers in pealing, iron-throated waves. There was no cheering. Not really. Durmstrang students were not prone to that, but there was a loosening, a collective exhale she could feel all around her. Outside, the grounds filled quickly. Emil was one of the first to break loose, vaulting onto his broom and shooting upward in a looping arc, ignoring Hermione's sharp, instinctive cry of, "Oh, you mustn't," as frost streamed from his bristles like scattered diamonds. He laughed with unusual liveliness, half relief and half pure exhilaration, and others followed. Brooms streaking the pale sky, mortar and pestle contraptions rowing themselves clumsily through the air, their occupants whooping with delight. Hermione sat on a nearby log, huffing faintly, shivering as cold seeped through her robes. She glared skyward and wished quite fiercely that a hot air charm was not against the rules. Nearby, a pair of first-years tried to catch sunbeams on the snow, stamping and laughing as their scarves spiraled behind them. Artemius and Alexander stood near a pewter cauldron, ladling out cups of spiced mead to anyone tall enough to be trusted with it. Along the battlements, a handful of Durmstrang's gargoyles enchanted only briefly nodded and clattered their wings, waddling closer as if curious about the noise. After a moment, Hermione allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was good, she admitted, to see the sun again. But in the weeks following, she did not allow herself to see it too often. The darkest corners of the library were the most attractive, especially now that Victor Krum, Durmstrang's seeker, had received an offer to the Bulgarian national team training camp for the summer. Every time Hermione saw the surly-looking boy, he was surrounded by more and more people, which would be fine usually, if not for the fact that Krum seemed intent on frequenting the library every day. As Hermione heard yet another shrill giggle, jarring her focus from a rather philosophical text on the nature of secrets that Mistress Merle had insisted would help her understand both revealing and secrecy charms more deeply, she gritted her teeth. "What are they giggling over?" she demanded, glancing between Emil, Astrid, and Sophia. The latter, having been brought by Astrid Sophia, was struggling in natural magic and was now looking through Hermione's notes for help. "I mean, really. He's not even handsome." Emil, whose head had been laying on an open arithmancy book, glared weakly up at Hermione. "Well, there are things that matter more than good looks, you know. He's talented, amazingly so." "A prodigy." Sophia's head snapped up from Hermione's notes as if summoned by the word talented. "Amazing glisso," she echoed, scooting closer on the bench and nearly knocking over Hermione's ink pot. "Honestly, Hermione, you have no idea. Do you know what his spiral entry percentage is? Last season he pulled a double-vein corkscrew out of a Baltic crosswind and still kept optimal snitch sightlines. That's not normal. That's like preternatural seeker instincts." Hermione blinked at her. "I hiss, what percentage?" Sophia waved a hand, curls bouncing, entirely undeterred. "You know, the way he leans into the broom's spine during a high-altitude dive. Most seekers overcorrect and lose drag balance, but Krum rides turbulence. He uses a modified Ransky feint. Well, every uncle said a Ransky feint, but purists know it's more of a split-horizon drop with a delayed pull-out, and then bam. Snitch secured before the chasers even realize what's happened." "Wow," said Hermione, not wowed at all. "That's, I mean, really something. But while I'm sure doing wonky feints is very hard, do remember he's just flying around very fast and catching something very small. Is it really worth all this fuss?" Before Sophia could launch into another impassioned explanation involving snitch wake eddies and phantom drafts, Astrid cut in smoothly, flipping another page of her own book. Heiss impressive. Anyone who says otherwise is lying or blind. And Hermione, you have to realize that crumbs are really attractive really at this moment in time. Obviously, people want to be around him. Quidditch is the most popular sport for wizards worldwide, and he's been given a chance to be on the Bulgarian national team a little over a year before the World Cup. Ally? Asked Hermione scathingly. Oh, yes, I'm sure packs of girls are following him to advance their long-standing aspirations. Truly, their cunning is unmatched. God, is everyone here so stuck up they can't even admit when they fancy someone? Beside her, Emil's cheeks pinkened. Astrid rolled her eyes. Well, I can, she said, but Lars is such a tough one to crack. He basically has been doing nothing but teasing me endlessly. Did I tell you about how he talked about how he wanted to learn portkey magic? I'm not seeing how that's teasing. Emil sighed, weary beyond belief. A portkey is needed to go anywhere. There's this sixth-year girl, Victoria Mayer, who learned the portkey spell even though it's restricted magic, and she's who everybody arranges their getaways through. Astrid thinks Lars wants to learn it to take her on a date. Hermione's brows furrowed. But why wouldn't Lars just do it through Victoria? Because why would he involve another girl on our date? Asked Astrid fiercely. Sophia was nodding along. That'd be so disrespectful. Honestly, if he asked me out and I heard that he was hanging around Maya, I'd slap him. Then I'd kiss him because he's so cute. But still that's just not done. It'd be like if I asked him out and actually if I asked him out full stop. If you ever catch me asking out a man, check for signs of the imperious curse. Immediately, please. What about a Mortentia? Asked Sophia, giggling. As if no love potion is strong enough to make me do that. People dosed with that stuff still know what's fundamentally right from wrong, like that girl who stunned her lover when he tried to kill her family. It was only Hermione's desire to finish her book that stopped her from saying anything more like, for example, the fact that Astrid had asked Lars out multiple times before. From Emil's look, it seemed he was suffering similarly, and as time marched on, her academic fervor was reaping many a reward. In arithmancy, she turned in an essay so long that Master Raskov's lip twitched when he took it, a sure sign of an impending barb. The portly man seemed to delight in tearing Hermione down every class, marking her down for whatever rule he made up that day. So Hermione braced herself for the usual withering remark about verbosity or her unseemly eagerness to be clever, but it did not come. Raskov read in silence, thick fingers tracing lines with visible reluctance. When he reached the end, he paused. His eyes flicked back to the final paragraph, Hermione's rambling conclusion, where she had chased a thought too far and ended up more unsure about magical modeling than she had been at the beginning of the essay. He cleared his throat. You will find, he said stiffly, not looking at her, that this line of inquiry has precedent, advanced precedent. I suggest you curb your enthusiasm until you possess the arithmetic maturity to pursue it properly. And perhaps also an editor, lest you bring me an entire novel full of irrelevant ideas just in hopes one is of merit. Hermione practically gaped as he handed the essay back without another insult. But of all the subjects, transfiguration mattered most. It mattered in a way that arithmancy or even charms did not, even though Mistress Merle adored her, clapping her hands in delighted little flutters whenever Hermione coaxed a spell into doing something it was not meant to, or whenever she spoke on concepts none of her peers could quite grasp. Yes, yes, exactly like that, Merle would say, her eyes shining. Oh, you have such a lovely mind, child, it hops. With transfiguration, Hermione had to be good at it. Better than Conrad. Better than good. Flourishing, even especially under Capel's eye. Her hatred of him was immeasurable, but she still greatly desired for him to see that she was succeeding, that whatever he had tried to carve out of her had not been taken. And so, she read. Most of the books were not meant for her. These were books who referenced principles she had not heard of as if they were foundational, whose arguments spiraled through dense theoretical thickets that required diagrams and cross-referenced marginalia just tapas. She built herself a little fortress of texts, stacks rising around her desk like battlements, and in the afternoons she forced herself from the library to practice. There were no rules against unsupervised transfiguration at Durmstrang, not the way there had been at Hogwarts. That freedom tasted dangerous and intoxicating all at once. Hermione spent quite a while practicing as many transformations as she could. Chairs to dogs, stools to birds, and once, disastrously, a table to something that had briefly possessed two manalags. That was how she found herself in the infirmary, cheeks burning, while Healer Frisk leaned against a cabinet, grinning. "Well," Frisk said cheerfully, wand flicking as she finished undoing the last lingering side, affect a faint tendency for Hermione's sleeve to ripple like fur. "That's the most interesting furniture-related injury I've seen this term." "I had it under control," muttered Hermione. "I'm sure you did," Frisk replied, entirely unbothered. "Until you didn't. Happens to the best of us, and to the worst. Mostly to the ambitious." Hermione did not know whether that was meant kindly or as a warning. It was alongside this obsessive studying that Hermione also began to pursue some extracurricular avenues as well. Instead of confronting Master Capel directly, something in her recoiled violently from the idea Hermione began researching him. Old school records were first. He had been brilliant as a student, top of his year in most classes, except for history, which he had failed miserably. Then she tried to find his publications. She hated how good they were. His writing was dense and dry, stripping all the sentiment from magic until it seemed an exact science. One book, co-authored with Master Thalberg, before Capel had even joined the staff in the 1960s, explored the links between animal-related transfigurations and alchemy, and Hermione couldn't help but read it twice, taking furious notes the entire time. Still, this did not answer her many questions about the man himself, and so she leaned on Astrid and Emil for gossip, framing her questions broadly at first, then narrowing. "Hermione, you know how I feel about that useless twit of a man," Emil said, scowling into his water skin. "He loves making nasty little comments whenever we struggle, but you know what? Maybe he could help by getting off his arse. He barely teaches. Half the time I think he's asleep. And I swear, Hermione, I swear he has animated quills grading essays. He doesn't even read them. I doubt he has the attention span to, even if he tried, which he doesn't." Even Emil himself appeared surprised by his outburst, but after a moment of sipping some more water, he sighed contentedly. "I really needed that, thanks. That was so freeing. Can we do that again?" "Well," Hermione said, aghast, "if he really is using animated quills, that's awful he's not even doing his job properly." Astrid snorted. Why would he want to? She, it turned out, respected Capel enormously. "Yes, yes, everyone knows he's a horrible professor," Astrid went on, twirling a strand of hair. "But honestly, he's sort of also my inspiration. Deputy headmaster with minimal effort, if any at all, that's efficiency. Success without suffering, not to single anyone out, but couldn't be you, Hermione." "That's not." Hermione stopped herself, exhaling. "How did he even get the position, then?" Astrid shrugged. "Politics. He's the one who recommended Karkaroff as the dark arts professor in the first place." Karkaroff, she glanced at Hermione, then quick, awkward, and exchanged a look with Emil. "Was in a bit of a snit back then, I heard. So when Karkaroff made headmaster, well, obviously he'd make Capel his second-in-command. That's the useful thing about friends, Hermione." "A snit?" asked Hermione, leaning forward. "What do you mean? What sort of snit was Headmaster Karkaroff in? It mustn't have been too bad if he was made a professor." "Well," Emil said, after a moment too long, that depends on what you mean by bad. You know, many people have different views on, many different things, you know." "No, I don't know." Hermione raised her eyebrows. "Care to explain?" There was a silence, thick and awkward, the sort that pressed in around Hermione's ears until she became acutely aware of her own breathing. She looked between them. Astrid's smile had gone brittle. Emil would not quite meet her eyes. "Well," Hermione prompted. Astrid sighed, sharp and annoyed, as though irritated with herself for having let the conversation wander this far. "It's old news," she said. "Ancient, really, from when we were all like babies. It barely matters now." "That usually means it matters," said Hermione flatly. Emil winced. "Hermione, no," she interrupted. "If I'm asking, it's because I want to know. I don't like half answers, Emil, you know that." Emil rubbed a thumb along the seam of his sleeve, then glanced at Astrid, who gave a minute nod. "All right," he said. He had gone very still. His fingers were laced together, knuckles pale, resting on his knee. There was legal trouble in Wizarding Britain a little over a decade ago. For a moment, all Hermione could do was stare. Both Emil and Astrid seemed to avoid her gaze. And at once, her mind drifted to when she had found out she was a witch, when she had eagerly tore through not only her course books, but also quite a few history tomes as well. "Oh," said Hermione in a small voice. So the headmaster was not to impugn his reputation, but Hugh was suspected of being a participant in the British Wizarding War, a participant on the Losing side, and he and Master Capel are old friends, you say. This time, the silence stretched even longer. Chapter 15. Never First. The first lesson after that horrifying revelation was, unfortunately, transfiguration. Hermione sat very straight at her desk, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her fingers had gone numb. Others were pouring into the class. She had never thought Durmstrang particularly loud, if anything, too quiet, but today, the whispered chatter felt deafening. Before, her feelings toward Capel had been a volatile knot of hatred and defiance, something she could burn against and transmute into effort. Now that hatred had thinned, replaced by raw terror. Capel had brought Karkaroff here, and Karkaroff was a Death Eater. She did not know much of the British Wizarding War, but knew that the driving force of the dark wizard Voldemort and his Death Eaters was precisely their opposition to the existence of people like her, Muggle-borns, and to go all the way to Britain to fight for that, as a Polish wizard. Headmaster Karkaroff must have felt quite strongly about Muggle-borns indeed. Hermione had no doubt Capel did as well, and that knowledge reframed every look, and every punishment, and every constructed humiliation. It did not matter, she realized, how well-crafted her essays were or how perfect her transfigurations became, for there was no version of success that could cleanse her blood. "Hermione," she blinked. Emil was leaning toward her from the neighboring desk, his brow creased with concern. His lips moved again, quieter this time. "Are you all right? You haven't said a word since breakfast." "Of course I am fine," said Hermione. She attempted a smile, but was sure by Emil's look it came across as a grimace. "I am a bit panicked is all. I've been studying up loads of transfiguration theory, just want to make sure I do well." "Of course you'll do well," said Emil, a little bemused. You. When haven't you done well?" "I got her," she lowered her voice then, 92% on an arithmancy quiz only a couple of months ago, don't you remember? "I truly hate you." She was the puzzled one now. That was an awful mark. Just because it had been higher than Emil's didn't make it any less true. But before she could say that, the bell rang and Capel ambled in. Somehow, he looked more severe than ever before, or perhaps that was simply in Hermione's mind. At once, Hermione hung her head as he began his lecture on their activity for the day. Rock to a bird of any kind. She did not wish to see him any longer. It was not until his voice no longer washed over the classroom and a hefty grey rock popped into existence upon her desk that Hermione dared look up. Emil was looking at her worriedly, but she ignored him. While some students were consulting their textbooks for the proper diagrams and others, like Conrad, she noted, were already beginning, Hermione took a moment to frown at the stone before her. To turn a rock into a bird was not impossible, but almost impolite, for lack of a better word. To turn the representative of Earth into a being of air was to spur solidity itself into motion. "HMMA Sparrow's a good choice, isn't it?" asked Emil nervously. "Why?" Hermione asked, her bushy brows raised. HMMA Sparrow's interesting. She beamed at him. I am really glad you're a being adventurous id, been worrying you'd choose something painfully boring, like a rock kestrel or a rock dove, just because the linguistic connection would make the transfiguration easier. Emil paused. You know, now that I think about it, I might go for the kestrel after all. He smiled guiltily. Inoso, I don't upstage you. A huff came from Hermione, and she focused on a stone once more. She would have liked to say she no longer cared of being upstaged, but the thought of Conrad beating her once more off, every awful thing Capel must think about Muggle-borns being proven true eagle, she thought wildly. Ill transfigure it into an eagle. Conrad won't do that, but what was there to connect a rock and an eagle? Earth into air, where would the weightiness go? She raised her wand, not yet casting, and let the idea unfold. For a moment, she was at a loss at what connected them then. Growth, she whispered, her eyes widening. A tree began within the earth, the soil of its mother and the seed of its father. It rose only through effort, through accumulation, through reaching. As roots gripped for what was solid, so too did branches claim what was open. Oh, how could she have been so blind? Stone was king of earth, as the eagle ruled the skies, and now that the bridge between the two elements became obvious, so too were other bridges built, based on both the abstract and minutiae, so numerous in number that it was as if she could already see the diagram form in her mind. Her wand moved before she could stop herself. It was in a slow, continuous sequence, a clockwise spiral at the stone's surface, twice around, then a precise upward jab, definition without release, she reminded herself. A flat horizontal sweep for the anchoring mass, then a twist, tap, a twist again, and on it went. The stone was, if one looked closely enough, shuddering. Around Hermione, Emil was muttering something about subsection C, paragraph 4 in the text. Ivan Petrov's rock emitted a discouraging puff of grey feathers and then somehow vanished. Still, it was as if the world were fading away, herself included. There was only the eagle and the stone whose form it was now inhabiting. Her wand traced a shape that was an odd sort of half-spiral, half-branching arc, like a sapling bending toward light. The magic of the transformation almost seemed to resist, then reconsider, the way it always did when properly argued with. Then her mind supplied the last movement, a soaring upward wave, clean and decisive. The culmination of everything she had been building toward. Hermione's gaze went up with the motion, until she saw Capel standing over a nearby desk. His steely eyes met hers, and her heart stopped for a moment, and her wand faltered mid-arc, and her magic no longer guided, no longer persuaded, collapsed inward on itself. There was no bird. Instead, there was an explosion. Stone detonated, bursting outward in a concussive bloom of dust and shrapnel, fragments shrieking through the air like sling stones. Hermione cried out and ducked instinctively, arms flying up to shield her head, but nothing struck her. The debris froze mid-flight, suspended in a halo of grey fragments around Hermione's desk. Then a flick from Capel's wand sent the dust and fragments joining once more, until it was just a hefty grey rock once more. The room was utterly silent. The entire class was watching her. In the front row, Astrid, her blue eyes wide, looked particularly disbelieving at Hermione's failure. Hermione's heart hammered so hard she thought she might be sick. She restrained herself from shivering in Capel's presence and steeled herself so as to look into his eyes. Capel sighed. Really, he said tiredly. One would think that after so much study, some discernment might finally take hold. His gaze drifted, unhurried, to the adjacent desk. Or perhaps incompetence is simply contagious. Emil flushed scarlet. I didn't, sir. Do be quiet, said Capel mildly. Your lack of talent has already proven sufficiently influential. Then he turned back toward her. As for you, Miss Morgenstern, but he did not get to finish that thought. A sudden flash of yellow streaked through the air. A canary had burst into being, wings beating furiously as it looped once, twice, then circled Conrad's head in a bright, mocking orbit. It let out a sharp, triumphant trill and darted away, perching smugly on the back of a chair. For a fraction of a second, so brief Hermione might have imagined it, The sharp-faced boy's lips twitched not at Capel, but Ather. The weeks that followed blurred together into a grind of effort and ache. At any given moment, if not in class or her dormitory, she was in the library, or if Emil managed to grab her away in the cave of listening with him. It was a quite nice place to study, although sometimes Hermione found she missed the clingy ladders, especially in contrast to the cave's constant whispery echoes. As they always did, the bi-weekly rankings went up on the iron notice board outside the Great Hall. Hermione stood before them, jaw set, eyes scanning downward, past all the parchments with her name on its top, to find Transfiguration. Conrad von Eisenwald I Hermione Morgenstern Roman 2 then, upon another parchment, Dueling Warfare. Conrad von Eisenwald Eipter Rehen ear Hermione Morgenstern Roman 3, it was not close enough to sting less for being expected. If anything, the certainty made it worse. Hermione had no doubt that she was excelling in the theoretical portions of both, but why was she still not up to par with practical? Although, she told herself, she was sure, in Transfiguration at least, it was due to all the bonus points she must be missing out on. After her disastrous attempt at transfiguring an eagle, Capel no longer treated her with advanced exercises as he once had. No, that was the sole territory of Conrad now. But Hermione was not complaining, for she did not feel a need to stand out to Capel anymore. In fact, she wished to blend in with the rest more than ever. Yet the same did not apply to dueling. The dueling hall rang with noise in a way few other places in Durmstrang ever did. Spells cracked and hissed against enchanted wards. Boots scraped over the polished stone. Voices rose in sharp calls and laughter that would have earned detentions anywhere else in the castle. Crimson banners hung from the rafters, each embroidered with the sigil of the Circle, an old, half-mythic society for students who were not content with theory alone. Hermione sat on the benches along the wall, knees drawn up, a book balanced against her thighs. It was an absurd book, nearly as thick as her head, an anthology of shape. The text was dense, riddled with footnotes that referred to other footnotes, but it was a fascinating exploration of the shaping charm nonetheless. And anyway, Hermione was simply skimming over the areas she already knew, so she hoped it would be a shorter read than one would first assume. Across the hall, Emil was being coached by an older girl on the dueling stances, blushing and stammering out an apology whenever she adjusted his form. Astrid, on the other hand, was dueling a lanky fourth-year boy who was very freckly and beady-eyed. She was losing quite badly. He seemed to delight in prolonging it. "Lacero," he cried, laughing delightedly at the cut that appeared on Astrid's cheek, dangerously close to her eye. Oh, missed again. "Us," she hissed, before sending a bone-breaking hex in response. He danced away. "Looks like we both have a bad aim," he cackled. Some sympathy was aroused within Hermione, but then her gaze was drawn elsewhere. Lars had finished his own match. He had been dueling a fifth-year a solid 1-2, and the bout had gone on long enough to draw a small crowd. When it ended, it was with Lars' opponent flat on his back, blinking up at the ceiling while Lars stood over him, breathing hard, blonde hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Lars offered a hand, hauled the other boy up, clapped him on the shoulder, and then, still grinning, turned toward the benches. His gaze found Hermione at once. She felt it like a prickle between her shoulder blades, even before he sauntered over, loose-limbed and infuriatingly pleased with himself. "Reading?" he asked, peering down at the book as though it were a curious insect. "In here. It's quieter than you'd think," said Hermione, turning a page. "Or perhaps I am just used to loads of noise. Even the library's filled with it nowadays, what with Crumb and his fan club." Lars jumped from foot to foot, grinning. "Well, we can make some more noise." Simon put the book down. He leaned down. "Heard from Astrid you got third. We both know you need as much practice as you can get." Funnily enough, Idoful in the fighting mood now. Hermione's eyes narrowed up at him. "If only my opponents in dueling class were so jinxable." A warm laugh came from Lars. "Oh, you wound me. Too bad you haven't ever achieved that in an actual duel, huh?" "Yes," Hermione gritted out, putting her book to the side. "Too bad." Lars' grin widened, bright and unapologetic, as if her irritation were a personal gift. Soon enough, they stepped onto the floor together, and Lars paced backwards, posture relaxed to the point of insolence. He bowed lowly then. Hermione mirrored him, watching the older boy intently. She was keenly aware of what she lacked in contrast to him. She was not fast, nor instinctive. He moved like a thing born to momentum, long-limbed, loose-shouldered, with boots barely seeming to touch the stone whenever he dueled. But she thought there were certainly areas where she exceeded him, weren't there? Or at least did not lag so far behind him in. Careful, he drawled, drawing his wand. You're staring again. Undressing you with your eyes, are you? Unbidden, Hermione snorted. Her wand was already up. Adding more clothes, if anything. Locomotor. A small stone at Lars' feet tore itself free and lunged at him. Lars laughed, and after a quick finite, his wand was already snapping towards her. A brilliant blue light filled her vision, and Hermione barely had enough time to remember the counter to the body-bind curse before she performed the familiar flick and twist. The jet of blue skidded away in sparks, and Hermione did not stop moving. Raz, she snapped, slashing her wand sideways. A great gout of silver flames lanced towards Lars, who was forced to spin away, skidding back many steps. But before Hermione could animate the fire further, a beam of scarlet flew her way. She barely had time to duck before Lars was pressing his advantage. He was practically a blur, sending spell after spell, and all Hermione could do was hurriedly identify and counter. But then she hurriedly managed to dodge one entirely, giving her the opportunity to cry, stupefy. It was stopped with contemptuous ease, but was soon followed with incendio. It was not cast at Lars, but at a spot before him, the bright orange flames crackling. Lars laughed. Morsus. By the Norns, your aim's awful. Hermione's next spell was once again not cast at Lars. The soft silver glow of a switching spell encased the flames, and at once the fire was not on the floor. A sharp yell filled the air as the flames instead were lighting the ends of Lars' crimson robes. Extinguo. He cried panikedly, having to dodge Hermione's next hex at the same time. Are you insane? Fluxus ventris. Letting loose a panicked squeak, Hermione countered the nasty-looking brown spell. Sorry, Kisito, but Lars, blue eyes wide, was ready for her. He yelled Protego. And at once her blindness hex seemed to splash harmlessly off an invisible wall. Hermione was flummoxed for a moment. Lars knew that spell. She had seen it used in exhibition matches before, but hadn't known fourth years were taught it, but she could not think on that for long, for Lars let loose a fierce cry and charged forth, his wand still raised. Hermione's eyes widened, and panic filled her. A dozen options crowded her mind at once, each clamoring to be the correct response. Her feet rooted as she tried to choose. The breath was knocked clean from her lungs as she was flung backwards, her heels skidding before she went down hard on the stone floor, wand clattering from her fingers. Above her, the faint shimmer in the air had faded. Lars peered down, blinking, then offered a sheepish grin. Should've gotten out of the way, he said, a little breathless. You froze. Hermione lay there, staring up at the ceiling, cheeks burning. Well, she said, I suppose there is a reason I am third. Lars snorted and offered her a hand. If that's third, I'd hate to see what you do when you finally decide to try. She slapped her palm into his and let him haul her upright, dusting non-existent grit from her sleeves. Her ribs ached, her head even more so. You did great, he added, softer now. Really. You're just saying that so defeating me counts as an actual achievement. Both of them laughed, but before either could say more, a sharp, familiar voice cut across the hall. Hermione. She turned just in time to see Emil hurrying toward them, pale and flustered, one hand hovering uselessly at Astrid's elbow as though afraid to touch her. Astrid, for her part, looked like she had gone 3 rounds with a hedge full of thorns. A nasty gash down one sleeve and upon one cheek, a purpling bruise along her jaw, and a limp she was clearly pretending did not exist. I told you not to finish the bout, Emil was saying under his breath, worried. You were clearly fine, Astrid said airily, flicking her hair back with her uninjured hand. I was winning, actually, if you consider moral victory. And besides, she spotted Lars and immediately brightened, shifting closer to him with an almost gravitational pull. Look who's here. My dear friend, or friends rather. She hurriedly beamed at Hermione too. Lars smiled warmly. What happened to you? Oh, nothing, said Astrid too quickly. Just a bit of enthusiastic spellwork. Honestly, some people get so emotional when they're losing. But you know, I was just so much of a fighter he stood no chance. Hermione hid a smile behind her sleeve. Emil, meanwhile, had gone stiff. His shoulders drew in slightly, his posture closing the moment he realized how close Astrid was standing to Lars. He nodded once. Hi, good duel. Yours too, Lars replied easily. You're improving. Thanks, said Emil, looking anywhere but at Lars. So, Astrid said suddenly, eyes bright. Did Hermione finally manage to knock you flat, or did you manage to defend your title as the reigning king? Barely, said Lars. She set me on fire. Emil's eyes widened with delight as he rounded on Hermione. Yeah, what? Oh, it wasn't like that, she said. I clearly didn't actually burn him, did I? You could have, Lars retorted, but he was grinning still. Well, thank every single guard ever that she didn't manage to get your face, said Astrid, giggling and sidling even closer to the taller boy. Still so fierce. Of course, though, many people are fierce. I am fierce too. Rower. She pawed lightly at his shoulder. A startled laugh escaped Hermione, quickly smothered by her hand, but not before it turned into an unmistakable giggle. Astrid froze mid-rower, color flooding her cheeks. She shot Hermione a mortified glare sharp enough to cut glass, straightening at once and dropping her hand as if it had burned her. Sorry, Hermione managed, still a bit giggly. I was thinking about something I'd read about feline transfigurations, she thought. She joined Emil in staring quite intently at the wall so as to center herself. Lars scratched the back of his neck, expression uncharacteristically thoughtful. Then, as if deciding something mid-thought, he looked directly at Astrid. Hey, he said, do you want to go out with me? Astrid blinked once, then twice, then thrice. Oh, she said slowly. Sure, yes, that could be pleasant, I suppose. Do you have a time and place in mind, or are you one of those boys that expect the girl to handle that? She pursed her lips. It would not be until half an hour later, in the infirmary, as healer Frisk tended to her wounds, that Astrid allowed herself to squeal. He's evil, a demon in human form. What sort of decrepit old man's obsessed with little girls? Not a good one, I tell you that. Hermione sighed, petting Puck absent-mindedly. Emil, she began, he's 15 and Astrid's 14. He's hardly elderly, that's practically ancient, Emil insisted, pacing the narrow length of Hermione's dormitory. And let's be honest, Astrid's amazing, but she's about 11 mentally. She is 14, Hermione said flatly, dragging Puck's brush down his spine in long, steady strokes. And she is not stupid, just a bit dramatic. Emil stopped pacing, whirled on one heel, and pointed at Hermione like Shed just argued that the sky was green. Dramatic. Sherrered at him, Hermione, rowered, like a sickly Kneasel trying to cough up a furball. And then she pawed at him. Do you know what kind of primal mating ritual that is? We're witnessing real-time evolutionary regression, and you are brushing your cat. It's times like these when you know a real friend from a fake one. Perhaps I am practicing for when Astrid finally completes the transition, said Hermione, her lips twitching. Why are you smiling? It's a real thing, Hermione. Magic is intent. And the fact that Lars only asked her out once she degraded herself, so it's sick. Honestly, if I were you, I'd layer protection charms on this room, lest he break in and ravish poor Puck. Emil looked down at the cat in question, then, wrinkling his nose. Well, I doubt he'd do that. But if you'd a prettier pet slowly and deliberately, Puck lifted his head. His yellow eyes fixed on Emil with a depth that suggested long memory and poor forgiveness. His tail stilled, his ears flattened, and he growled. It was not a cat's growl. It was low and gravel-thick and vibrated faintly through the bed frame. Emil froze mid-rant. He squeaked. He swallowed. I mean, Puck's lips peeled back just enough to show a hint of teeth. Not many, but enough. Puck, Hermione murmured mildly, brushing his black fur. Don't be rude. Emil didn't mean to call you ugly, right? She glared up at the boy in question. Right. Of course not, mumbled Emil. Puck's just beautiful. I love how stubby his legs are and all of his bald spots. And his eyes, it's like he stares into the void, and the void stares back, and then the void cries and asks for its mama. Gorgeously intimidating. I am sure Lars would love to ravish him. After a moment, Puck blinked slowly, then turned his back on Emil and began meticulously licking his own hind leg. Emil's shoulders sagged in relief. Still, it's weird, isn't it? He went on, quieter now. Astrid did something so embarrassing that it should have ruined her chances with him forever. I mean, if I were Lars, it'd have run for the hills which, by the way, Heshudo. Preferably into a dragon's den. Unfortunately for Emil, Lars did not, in fact, run screaming into a dragon's den, nor was he struck by lightning, cursed by fate, or turned into a toad, although, by the end of the week, Hermione herself had wished for each. Astrid spent the entire week talking about him, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he always looked faintly surprised when he laughed, his too-sharp incisors, everything. It was only by Friday, the day of the date, that Astrid no longer talked Hermione's ear off. In fact, just before she was due to rush back to her and Liv's dormitory to get prepared, she had not been speaking to Hermione for a good half an hour, just dutifully doing her homework in peace as Hermione did hers. Astrid's skin had always been pale, but she appeared almost ghostly now, and Hermione could see the beginnings of sweat slicking it. After a library ladder passed their table and paused to surreptitiously plop a book on pepper-up potion atop Hermione's own open tome, Hermione decided it was time to break the strange silence. So she began, leaning forth and trying to smile brightly. Your date's coming up soon. Astrid's quill paused, but she did not look up. Yes, it is. Relevance. Astrid, said Hermione slowly, trying another tactic. You look well. I don't mean to say bad, but bad. Astrid asked, her head shooting up at once, her eyes bulged like saucers. I look bad, do I? Oh God, Hermione winced. No, that's not what I meant at all, I swear. You look like someone about to experience a very, very significant event, I think. And I just think that you ought to remember. Lars is just a boy. You needn't worry too much. What's the worst thing that could happen? He gets so annoyed with my ramblings about gossip and random novels I read, like 3 years ago, that he murders me, said Astrid miserably. She pressed both hands flat to her parchment as though steadying herself against turbulence. Or he just transforms me into a creature and lets nature decide my fate. I don't think that's very likely at all, Astrid especially the latter, because human transfiguration is quite a tricky subject, since the Macovian laws don't apply when subverting the will of beings with sapience. So, Astrid leveled a glare at Hermione, who wisely decided to end that explanation. Still, Hermione went on, I think it'll all go fine. You're a clever, lively, and beautiful. You've got nothing to worry about. You have your flaws, of course. Butlers knows them, doesn't he? I certainly do, and he's known you far longer than I have. So if he isn't terribly unobservant. All boys are unobservant, interrupted Astrid once more, letting a snort loose. If they weren't, they'd rule the world. Actually, arguably they do, but they'd rule it even harder. Then Yow'll be perfectly safe if he's already at a disadvantage. Astrid huffed, then pressed her lips together. Her fingers twisted in the hem of her sleeve, worrying the fabric until it creased. It just feels, she said quietly, too good. Like I am borrowing someone else's luck, and any second now the universe is going to notice and demand it back with interest. Hermione smiled softly. Astrid, nothing about this is borrowed. You didn't trick him, didn't glamour him, didn't blackmail him, which, given this school, is already impressive. He asked you because he likes you. What if he only likes thighs? Astrid asked, almost shy as she gestured to herself. I know I am fun and lively and generally amazing to be around. Humble as well. That too. But maybe I am not exactly the deepest person out there. I've got no real passions, no strong stances in just me. What if that's not enough? What if he hates me? I mean, aren't we expected to talk about serious stuff during dates? I don't know any serious thing, and Lars asked just you out, didn't he? Sighed Hermione. And if he doesn't like you after tonight, it will not be because you weren't enough. It will be because you were too much, if anything. There's a difference. That made Astrid laugh properly, a shaky but genuine sound. You're awful at reassurement. She reached across the table and squeezed Hermione's hand. Thanks, I suppose, for listening and for not telling me I am ridiculous, even though you look like you really wanted to. You are ridiculous, said Hermione, smiling nonetheless. But that's unrelated. Astrid's lips twitched. She drew in a breath and then yelped as a sharp beep 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 cut through the air. The mechanical alarm clock Hermione had set for 6 o'clock was ringing so hard it looked like it was jumping from leg to leg. Quickly, Hermione tapped it to silence the clock, but it was too late. A nearby library ladder shuddered, its rungs clacking together like teeth. Another ladder rolled towards them disapprovingly. One Ivan Ivana, forever engraved upon its side, even ran directly into the table with its wooden frame. Sorry, my fault, Astrid squeaked, scrambling to gather her books. Oh God, Liv and Sophia are going to be so mad. I told them it'd be their bisics. No tafter, y'all be fine, said Hermione exasperatedly. Go have fun, and just remember, Lars is probably just as panicked and stressed as you are. Although I don't think he's preparing quite as much. Astrid hesitated, then threw her arms around Hermione in a sudden, fierce hug. If I survive, she said into her shoulder, I am telling you everything. And you better listen, because I can't tell Emil about it too much, obviously, so you need to be me, Emil, when it comes to this stuff. I love Liv and Sophia, but sometimes they just echo whatever I say, so. Oh, yes, I expect a full report by morning. Now go. Astrid laughed, then was bodily herded away by the ladders, which clacked approvingly once she was moving out at an acceptable speed. For many moments, Hermione watched her go. It was not until Astrid disappeared around the shelves when she looked down at her own stack of textbooks. Slowly, she closed them. There were other answers she needed tonight. Not about magical minutiae or the psyche of boys, but about the faculty. Hermione had been researching them for many days, but it was quite hard to do so when either Emil or Astrid were around. She could not risk them figuring out her secret. She gathered her bag and turned toward the far end of the library, where the witchlight dimmed and the shelves grew older and dustier. Hermione paused beside a ladder that had been pretending very hard to be inanimate. It twitched even more as she came closer. Excuse me, she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was close enough to overhear. Where's the genealogy section? The ladder shuddered with what could only be enthusiasm. Its bell gave a single, delighted ding, and then it shot forward down the aisle with startling speed, nearly clipping Hermione's shoulder on the way past. Oh, wait, she hissed, breaking into a brisk walk as it clacked ahead of her. It weaved between shelves, turned sharply, nearly tipped over another ladder, which clacked something rude in response, and no, Hermione still did not know how she could tell, and finally skidded to a halt before a long, neglected row of toll-bound volumes. The ladder straightened proudly. Yes, thank you, Hermione muttered, patting its side despite herself. She climbed, tugged free several heavy tomes, lineages of the wizarding German Confederation, families of influence, post-unification, blood, bonds, and power, and carried them back to her table in a careful stack. They landed with a solid thump that made the witchlight flicker. Hermione wasted no time. She flipped pages quickly, eyes skimming dense paragraphs and family trees. As expected, the first books were preoccupied with the old noble houses, former princelings and barons stripped of their titles when the Confederation was formed, yet still pulling strings from behind the curtain. She knew this history well enough, how Grindelwald's rise had flattened them entirely, reducing even the most ancient names to mere citizens, and how, after his defeat in 1945, they had quietly crept back into relevance, influence returning without much ceremony. Her finger paused briefly on von Eisenwald, which had received a respectable entry. They had first achieved prominence in the 9th century. Gebhard von Eisenwald, a noble even then, but one of little importance, having served as a burgman, a protector of the castle. He had done his job so well. His family had been granted its own estate alongside a hereditary prince-elector seat, and thereafter had amassed much power. Many archmagisters of the Confederation had taken on von Eisenwald men for wise counsel, to the extent that there had been a slight skirmish in 1537, when the archmagister at the time had taken on a councilwoman of impure blood instead. Still, Hermione eventually stopped reading and flipped past the many pages detailing their achievements. This was not about Conrad nor his family, but a search for Capet. Yet, as she read on for a long while, that search appeared fruitless. The only reference to Capel she could find was in one tree, where the third daughter of a wizard of much status had married an elk Capel. Hermione shut the book with a sharp snap, jaw tightening. Frustration prickled beneath her skin. Capel was a dead end. And so her thoughts slid, unbidden, to Varric. She had been her first suspect, but Hermione now knew that she had been protecting her before stopping altogether. But as for why, Hermione still did not know, and this research just made her more confused, if anything. Capel had no power, at least, not any inherited. But she supposed Hugh was friends with Karkaroff, wasn't he? And Hermione had heard him threaten to go to the headmaster whilst arguing with Varric, although, at that time, she had come across as entirely unconcerned. Which made sense, as Capel had been the one to admit Hermione, not Varric, and Hermione doubted very much that Karkaroff was in on it. From what she had read of Death Eaters, they were not the type to simply send mean letters to Muggle-borns. Their methods tended to be a bit more violent. Now, if Capel was some sadist who had taken Hermione in just to torture her, then Varric must have known his threat to expose her protection of Hermione was empty. What else would affect Varric so? The only powers Capel had were institutional and magical. Hermione doubted Varric lagged far behind in the latter, and as for the former she whispered at once. Capel had been teaching at Durmstrang for decades, and Varric was in her 30s. She had likely attended while he was still a professor. A teacher who knew you as a student knew everything. Your mistakes, your weaknesses, the foolish things done before you understood consequences. There were 1,000 ways to ruin someone with that sort of knowledge, and none of them would ever make it into a book. For that matter, wasn't that what Capel was doing now, but to Hermione instead. Hermione's shoulders slumped in disappointment. If her suspicion was correct, there was never going to be a way for her to convince Varric to take up protecting her once more. She was alone, truly and completely. By the time the light streaming in from the lofty windows shifted toward evening hues, Hermione had abandoned the genealogy volumes entirely. She stood, rolled her shoulders, and moved deeper into the archival section. Here, the air was colder. Boxes lay stacked in uneven towers, their labels yellowed and corners furred with cobwebs. Hermione brushed one aside, sneezing softly, and began to read the small index cards affixed to the lids. Disciplinary Records, Durmstrang Institute. The punishments listed on each card were quite stark. Lashings, canings, potions. Testing Hermione's stomach turned, but she pressed on. Capel would have attended in the 1940s, and so she counted boxes and checked dates, moving steadily downward. Her fingers were numb with cold by the time she found one marked 19381946. She opened it. Cards rustled softly as she flipped through them, skimming through the names, offenses, and punishments until one caught her eye. Karkaroff, Igor, 10 lashings. Journeyed beyond fortress bounds during the dark days. Hermione frowned before finding another, and another, and another. Karkaroff appeared far more often than Shed expected. He had been much too reckless and disobedient for a future headmaster, in her opinion. Although, she supposed, Herr had become a Death Eater, still, it did not fit her view of the man. Karkaroff kept to himself the vast majority of times, and Hermione had never even heard of any student ever being sent to his office except for perhaps Victor Crumb. Although he was not quite sent, and more so invited, rumor had it. Even at meals, he did not talk very much at the high table. She had taken to watching it quite intently, and was quite sure that he rarely even conversed with Capel, the friend who had taken him here in the first place. But then Hermione paused at one card. Finally. She had spotted a Capel Ulrich, although it was adjacent to Karkaroff's name. Apparently, they had hexed a younger student together. Capel had been transfigured into a toad for half an hour, and Karkaroff for an entire 2. And as she searched on, she saw Capel's name crop up only a few times more, always adjacent to Karkaroff, though, and often with a much lighter punishment. It did not make any sense how did a man transition from such a follower to a sadist operating under his friend's nose. Or, Hermione thought, he must have always been quite good at keeping secrets. Quite good indeed.